Welcome to TechNOW. I'm your host, John Reid, also CEO of CATA Alliance. And we have today a very important topic, anti-spam, known as CASL. And we're joined by Tim Graham, the president of OTG Group of Companies, and David Canton, who is a partner with Harris and Pensa in London, Ontario. So we have Montreal, we have London, and I always think it's a good idea to start with a perspective piece. So David, I read some of your blogs. Can you share with us your insight into some of the risks inherent with the new anti-spam legislation?
Absolutely. As you know, the new anti-spam legislation that took effect here in Canada on July 1, it's commonly called CASL for the Canadian anti-spam legislation. And unfortunately, CASL defines spam, or what it calls a commercial electronic message, or CEM, very broadly, and it includes almost anything that's slightly promotional in nature that you might send. And it's regardless of volume, so that one email sent by one employee to one other person can be spam. And that can attract all of the sanctions of the Act. And the sanctions under the Act are pretty scary, quite frankly. There's a $1 million fine for individuals, up to $10 million for a corporation. In certain circumstances, there is actually director and officer personal liability. And frankly, the scariest one to me is that in 2017, private rights of action are going to kick in with statutory damages. And what that means is that anybody who you sent a spam message to, including class actions, can sue you privately for damages. And they don't have to prove their actual damages. All they have to do is, there's a formula in the Act to figure out what the damages are. So that's kind of scary. The class action lawyers will love it, but that's where that fits. And if you're going to send a commercial electronic message, it has to be with your express consent of the recipient. And there are specific ways that you have to get that under the Act. But if you don't have express consent, you have to find one of a complex series of exceptions or implied consents. And one of the tough parts is that the onus is on the sender to actually prove compliance. So if somebody accuses you of sending spam, then you have to be able to prove that you had consent, which means that you have to keep records of how you got express consent from people and when you got it, or if you're relying on implied consent, you have to talk about, or you have to have records of how they fit into an implied consent category. And as well, if you're sending what qualifies as a CEM, that message has to include some specified contact information, and it has to include an unsubscribe mechanism. So you add all that up, and if you're sending like mass emails, like newsletters and that kind of promotional stuff, while it's difficult to deal with it, it can be managed, because you can have one or two people that are trained on this, and it can keep the right records, make sure that stuff has the right things in them, that they're only sending it to people they have permissions from, and all that sort of thing. And so you can handle that. But the really tough thing to handle is the one-off emails. So if you have a sales force, for example, that is sending promotional emails to attract business, or even if you have the nature of your business is where you have lots of people that could potentially send out an email to somebody that is slightly promotional in nature, then it becomes really difficult, because no matter how much training you do, and no matter how hard you try to tell however many employees you have that fit that role, frankly, it's too complex. The chances that they'll remember it all or get it right are slim. And unfortunately, we have this sentiment that I've seen before when I'm helping clients out with this is there's a lot of people that kind of go, well, I don't believe this is, they just don't believe it, or they don't think it's reasonable, or they don't care about it, therefore they stick their heads in the sand and they just going to send the email anyway saying, well, who's going to complain? Well, so far, as of 2 weeks ago, the CRTC says they have over 100,000 complaints on for spam, and the CRTC doesn't have the time to go after everybody, but it will go after people that it has complaints from, and you can bet that it will choose some people to make some examples of as soon as it's able to do that. So there's a significant risk there.
So David, just interesting, only 100,000 complaints, that seems like that will grow significantly. I wanted to give Tim Graham in Montreal, who I've also spoken to about this issue. Tim, is this a pretty accurate call on the risks inherent with the new legislation? I know you've been working on some compliance software. What do you have to say about the issue?
Well, you have to look at it, and there is no de minimis, and that's where I think the most important thing is. When you look at trying to solve spam, you got to think of how the regulators came up with what spam was going to be, and spam, the receiver doesn't know how many spam are being sent out, how many emails, so you have to look at it, it's a single piece. We started building a solution for this for our clients about 19 months ago, and we really needed to focus on individual emails. If you look at a lot of the solutions that have been put forth, homegrown in a corporation or over the market or over the in the marketplace, they're really looking after the bulk side of the email. The analogy that we've used so far is that everyone is looking at solving problems that you could say it was like a railroad, and sending bulk email on a railroad, where if you look at a city street, those are commercial emails. If you think of cars, that's commercial emails as well. You have to solve that problem as well. So you can solve the bulk email, have 3 or 4 people look after that email system and sending emails, but how do you control 1,000 people, 8,000 people sending commercial emails? Every one of those is an exposure. And that's what the CASL Cure solution is solving.
David, we have small businesses, large businesses, government organizations, all looking at this. If you had one key piece of guidance to give to the marketplace, what would that be?
Well, I think that the key piece here is to take a sort of an audit, as it were, of your own email practices and who in your firm sends out email and why do they send it, and do those, and you have to look at that in light of the tests and exemptions and implied consents in the Act and say, okay, where do these fit in? And then once you figure that out, then you can decide what emails are exempt and what emails you just can't send at all, and which ones that you have to get these express or implied consents for, and how you're going to track that. So you have to kind of go through that process to figure out where you are. And one good thing is doing that diligence, will help you if you're, if you do nothing and ignore it and you're caught. Your consequences are going to be far worse than if you tried to comply and did the best you could and something went through anyway.
Well, this has been a very important discussion, and one of our roles at CATA is to alert the marketplace to legislative risk, and I think we've done that. Obviously, in 10 minutes, we could drill into more detail, but we're going to clip some URLs into the communique. Tim and David, I want to thank you for joining TechNOW this morning. John Reid, signing off. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.